Let's get one thing straight. When someone treats you like you don't matter, especially after everything you gave, that's not a reflection of your worth. That's a reflection of their inability to handle what you represented in their life. It's not that you didn't mean anything. It's that you meant too much. You see, it's easier for some people to pretend you were just a phase, just a passing moment, just someone who came and went. Because if they were to actually face the truth, that you matter would have to deal with something they're not ready to facing, the loss. The regret, the fear of not being good enough for the version of you that showed up. They don't ghost you, go cold, or act indifferent because they've forgotten you. They do it because they remember everything. And remembering makes it harder for them to live with what they let go of. So what do? They act like you're nothing, because pretending you're nothing makes it easier for them to protect their ego. Pretending you're nothing helps them silence the voice in their head that says, "You pushed away something real." And here's where I need you to wake up to your own power. Don't chase someone who's too much of a coward to acknowledge the impact you had. Don't internalize their coldness and call it truth. Don't water down your worth just because someone couldn't drink deeply enough. It's not your job to force someone to see you. It's your job to continue being someone who sees yourself clearly and honestly, no matter how blind someone else chooses to be. You were not too much. You were not confusing. You were hard to love. You were simply real. And being real in a world full of fragile egos and emotional avoiders. That's rare. That's brave. So if he's acting like you were nothing, just know it's because being with you cracked something open in him. And instead of facing it, he shut the door. He ran. He minimized you because maximizing you would mean confronting what he couldn't give. And that has nothing to do with your value. That has everything to do with his capacity. So take the silence, take the distance, and instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" start asking, "Why did I tolerate someone who couldn't meet me where I stood?" You're not crazy for caring. You're not wrong for feeling. You're not broken because someone chose to ignore what was true. You're healing. And healing means you stop begging to be seen and start choosing the places where your presence is valued, not erased. Remember, someone pretending you're nothing is usually just hiding from the truth that you were everything. And that truth, that's their burden to carry, not yours. You carry this self-respect, clarity, and a heart that knows what real connection feels like and refuses to settle for anything less. He pretends you're nothing to avoid facing what he lost. It sounds cruel, but it's a defense. It's not about you not having value. It's about him not having the courage to face how much you actually meant. When someone acts like you were just a moment, just a fling, just something they've moved past without thought, they're often hiding the fact that letting you go shook them. Because if they were truly indifferent, they wouldn't need to act so detached. Indifference doesn't scream. Indifference doesn't pretend. Indifference doesn't put on a show. But pretending, that's loud, that's messy, that's effort. And effort tells a story. People minimize what they can't emotionally manage. So if someone is acting like you were nothing, it's probably because admitting the truth that you were something deeply important would force them to deal with the choices they made and the emotional maturity they lacked at the time. Maybe you saw them, truly saw them. Maybe you loved in a way they weren't ready to receive. Maybe you were available, open, ready, and honest, and they weren't. And now they don't know how to hold all of that. So instead of honoring it, they dismiss it. It's easier to rewrite history than to feel regret. And that's what's happening when someone who once had your heart tries to downplay your place in their life. They're rewriting history, not because it's true, but because it hurts less. If they accept you as significant, they have to accept what they did with something significant. They have to face the way they treated something meaningful as disposable. That's a heavy truth. Not everyone is ready to carry it. He pretends you didn't matter because facing how much you did would confront him with the part of himself he's avoiding. The immature part, the scared part, the emotionally unavailable part. He doesn't want to see the reflection you held up, so he smashes the mirror. That doesn't mean you weren't the mirror. It means he couldn't stand the image staring back at him. You being strong, vulnerable, genuine. It terrified him because it demanded he rise to the same level. And when someone's not ready for that, they don't blame you. They vanish. They act cold. They try to rewrite the ending like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. You know it. Deep down, so does he. That's why he's avoiding it. That's why he can't talk to you without tension. That's why he can't even look at you with calm honesty. Because if he lets his guard down for even a second, the weight of what he lost will come rushing in. And he's not equipped to handle that, so he does the only thing he knows how to do, pretend. He pretends you were nothing, because pretending makes him feel like he didn't fail. Pretending means he doesn't have to deal with the consequences of walking away from something real. People don't forget when you mean everything. They remember it constantly. It shows up in their silence. It shows up in their avoidance. It shows up in the way they go cold without cause. That's not peace. That's hiding. And the harder they try to convince the world you didn't matter, the more obvious it becomes that you did. Because when something truly doesn't matter, it fades quietly. It doesn't need to be pushed out. It doesn't need to be erased. It just goes. But when it mattered, and they know they mishandled it, the pretending becomes louder, more deliberate, more painful to watch. So when he acts like you're nothing, it's not because you were. It's because admitting otherwise would require growth he's not ready for. It would require accountability he's not mature enough to face. It would require emotion he's spent his life trying to suppress. That's not your burden. That's not your shame. That's not your problem to fix. Your only job is to recognize the game when it's happening and not let it shape your sense of worth. You can't take someone's avoidance and turn it into truth. You can't take their fear and call it fact. You can't take their inability to face you and let it become the reason you doubt yourself. Letting someone go doesn't hurt because you were nothing. It hurts because you were everything, and they didn't know what to do with it, so they buried it. But just because they pretend it didn't matter doesn't mean it didn't. The way you showed up, the way you loved, the way you cared, that all lives in their memory, even if they never say it, even if they deny it, even if they try to forget. It's there, in the quiet, in the background, in the echo of what could have been. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's inability to value it. When someone fails to see your depth, your loyalty, your kindness, your strength, it doesn't mean those things aren't there. It only weren't they capable of recognizing or appreciating them. And too often, when someone pulls away, when they go silent, when they treat you as if you're replaceable, it's easy to start questioning everything about yourself. You start wondering if maybe you weren't good enough, if maybe you were too much or not enough, or if you just made loving you too complicated. But that's not the truth. The truth is that someone else's failure to meet you with the same energy isn't a mirror reflecting your inadequacy. It's a spotlight revealing their limitations. You can give someone your best and still not be enough for them. Not because your best isn't valuable, but because they simply weren't ready to receive it. There are people who say they want love, but what they mean is they want comfort without the commitment, connection without the responsibility, intimacy without the accountability. They want all the good feelings that come with being loved, but work it takes to truly show up for someone else. And when you show up fully, when you bring your honesty, your vulnerability, your heart, and they back away, it doesn't mean you were wrong to give. It means they weren't equipped to receive what was real. Your value doesn't shrink just because someone couldn't see it. Think about a diamond lying in the dirt. If someone walks past it because it's covered in dust, does that change the fact that it's still a diamond? No. The person walking by just didn't recognize its worth. And you, in your love, in your effort, in your truth, you are that diamond. You might have been overlooked by someone too distracted, too emotionally closed off, too self-involved to see it. But that doesn't dull your shine. That doesn't erase your value. That doesn't mean the next person won't see you clearly. What happens too often is people start trying to change themselves based on someone else's rejection. They soften their truth, hide their needs, suppress their feelings, and start molding themselves in something smaller, quieter, easier to digest. But love isn't about making yourself less. It's about finding someone who's strong enough to meet you at your full size. Someone who welcomes your depth instead of drowning in it. Someone who hears your voice and doesn't ask you to lower the volume. You don't need to shrink to be worthy of love. You don't need to become more palatable to be valued. You just need to stop confusing someone's emotional immaturity with your own lack of value. Sometimes the most emotionally unavailable people are the ones who seem the most charming in the beginning. They're good with words, good with appearances, good at making you feel special, until the moment things start getting real. And when that happens, they retreat, they ghost, they avoid. And instead of admitting they weren't ready, they make you feel like it was your fault. But someone not being ready for you is not the same thing as you not being enough. The two are not connected. They are just intersecting truths happening at the same time. You were enough, and they were not prepared. It's painful when someone you gave so much to can't give you even the bare minimum in return. It's painful when you're emotionally invested and they suddenly treat you like a stranger. But pain is not proof of failure. Sometimes pain is just proof that you were real, that you loved, that you showed up. And no one can take that away from you. You can hold your head high knowing that you didn't play games, you didn't fake it, and you didn't pretend. You gave with a full heart. That matters. That means something. That speaks volumes about who are your worth is not a vote. It's not up for debate. It's not decided by someone else's ability to commit. You are valuable because of how you love, how you speak, how you heal, how you grow. You're valuable because of the energy you bring into a room, the clarity you offer in a world full of confusion, the strength you show even when you're hurting. And if someone couldn't see that, couldn't cherish that, couldn't hold that with care, it says everything about where they are in life and nothing about who you are in your soul. Don't shrink yourself to fit someone else's fear. So many people spend their lives diming their light, softening the voice, second their voice, guessing their feelings, all to make someone else feel more comfortable. You hold back your truth because you're afraid it will push them away. You hesitate to ask for what you need because you're scared it will make you look needy. You pretend you're fine with less because you think asking for more will scare them off. But when you start shrinking to make someone stay, you're already losing the relationship with yourself. You're already sending a message to your own heart that someone else's peace matters more than your authenticity. There are people who aren't ready for real connection. They're not ready for honest conversations, for emotional transparency, for deep love. So when you show up as the full version of yourself, open, expressive, unfiltered, they get nervous. They pull back. They start throwing around phrases like too intense, too sensitive, or too emotional. But what they really mean is, you're showing me a level of presence I don't know how to hold. And instead of them rising to meet you, you start shrinking to make the gap feel smaller. You silence your thoughts. You lower your expectations. You try to be easier to love, but love that requires you to become less of yourself isn't love. It's emotional compromise disguised as connection. If someone gets close to you and then asks you, whether directly or indirectly, to be less emotional, passionate, less expressive, that's not a relationship that can grow. That's not someone you can build a future with. That's someone trying to manage their own discomfort by minimizing your presence. And it's not your job to carry the weight of their fears. It's not your responsibility to help them avoid growth by hiding the parts of you that challenge them. When you hide your needs, when you pretend your emotions don't exist, when you walk on eggshells just to keep the peace, you're trading self-respect for temporary comfort. You might win their approval for a while. You might delay the conflict. You might even feel like you're being the cool one, the one who doesn't ask for much, who doesn't make things complicated. But eventually, that suppression turns into resentment. You start feeling invisible. You start feeling unheard. And worst of all, you start believing that maybe you were never supposed to take up space in the first place. But the truth is, the right person won't ask you to shrink. The right person won't flinch at your emotional honesty. They won't make you feel like a burden for having needs. They won't run from your clarity. They'll lean in when things get real. They'll listen even when it's uncomfortable, and they'll never use your depth as a reason to distance themselves. Because love isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about growing through it together, and you deserve someone who sees your fullness not as something overwhelming, but as something beautiful, powerful, and worth showing up for. You're allowed to feel deeply. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to expect presence, attention, effort, and consistency. These are not demands. These are the foundations of healthy connection. And anyone who tells you otherwise is revealing their fear, not your flaw. You don't need to apologize for having standards. You don't need to tone down your joy or bottle up your pain to be lovable. You are lovable in your fullness. You are worthy in your complexity. And the right connection won't just tolerate that. It will thrive because of it. Don't become smaller to keep someone who isn't strong enough to stand beside you. Don't shrink your light to make it easier for someone else to stay in the shadows. You were not made to disappear. You were not made to edit yourself to be accepted. You were made to show up as the full version of who you are. Bold feeling, raw, sincere. The moment you feel yourself holding back who you are to keep someone close, ask yourself what kind of love you're really building. Is it love rooted in truth or love built on fear? Because love built on fear can't hold you. And love that can't hold you can never grow with you. You can't lead with fear and expect to arrive at something meaningful. You can't constantly wonder if being yourself will scare someone off and still call it connection. You have to be brave enough to risk the loss in order to find what's real. That means speaking even when your voice shakes. That means staying open even when you're tempted to shut down. That means trusting that being too much for the wrong person doesn't mean you're too much. It just means they weren't enough to meet you where you stood. True healing begins when you stop needing their validation. As long as you're waiting for someone who hurt you to acknowledge your pain, to apologize, to give you closure, you're handing them power over your peace. You're putting your emotional well-being in their hands, hoping they'll come back and tell you that you mattered, that they miss you, that it was all a mistake. But healing doesn't come from someone else's words. Healing begins the moment you decide that your worth isn't tied to their recognition of it. You can spend days, weeks, even years holding on to a version of the story where they finally see your value, where they reach out and explain why they acted the way they did, where they admit they were wrong and that they never should have let you go. But clinging to that version of the story keeps you stuck in the past. It traps you in a waiting room that has no exit because you're waiting for someone to give you something they were never able to give you in the first place. Emotional maturity, accountability, understanding the truth is if someone couldn't validate you when you were standing right in front of them, giving them your time, your energy, your care, then it's unlikely they'll be able to give it to you from a distance. If they couldn't treat you with respect when you were in their life, what makes you think they'll develop that respect once you're gone? People don't magically grow just because you're hoping they will. They grow when they choose to. And if they haven't chosen to, then waiting around for their validation only keeps you small. You don't need them to understand what they lost. You don't need them to see your side. You don't need them to give you permission to move forward. The closure you're waiting for is not something they can give. It's something you give yourself when you stop chasing their approval and start choosing your peace. When you stop asking, why didn't they choose me? And start asking, why was I trying to prove my worth to someone who couldn't see it? Validation is a tempting drug. It makes you feel seen. It soothes the pain. It tells you weren't crazy for caring. But needing it from the person who wounded you is like trying to fix a broken heart with the same hands that dropped it. Their inability to love you the way you deserve doesn't make you unlovable. Their silence doesn't make your feelings less valid. Their absence doesn't make the connection meaningless. It simply reveals where they are on their journey and where you no longer need to follow. Healing starts when you rewrite the story in your own voice. Not the voice that says you weren't enough, not the voice that questions everything you did, not the voice that keeps replaying the what-ifs, but the voice that says, I showed up, I was real, I gave what I had. And that's enough. Healing starts. Stop seeking their explanation and start building your own understanding. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to forgive them before you're ready. But you do have to stop letting their lack of validation define your value. There are people who will never admit they were wrong, who will never say sorry, who will move on and pretend you never mattered. And that hurts. But what hurts more is waiting for them to make it right while your life stands still. Your healing doesn't require their participation. It requires your decision to stop letting their choices shape your identity. Your decision to stop letting their silence speak louder than your own truth. Your decision to stop needing them to say what you already know deep down. You were never invisible. You were never forgettable. You were never too much. You were just too real for someone who couldn't meet you where you stood. And they may never say it. They may never admit it. But that doesn't change what's true. You don't need their validation to heal. You don't need their voice to find your peace. You don't need their closure to move forward. You just need to choose yourself again and again, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when a part of you still wants to hear the words they'll probably never say. Healing doesn't mean you never think about them. It doesn't mean you don't still feel the sting of being overlooked. It means you stop letting that sting define your days. It means you let yourself grieve without letting the grief control you. It means you rise, not because they told you could, but because you finally remembered you were always capable of standing tall on your own. In this powerful motivational speech, we explore the emotional truth behind why you should never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's limitations. If you've ever felt like you were too much, too emotional, or too real for someone to handle, this video will remind you that your worth is not defined by their fear. Learn how to reclaim your voice, stop apologizing for your depth, and heal without needing their validation. This is a message for every person who gave too much and received too little in return. You don't have to change who you are to be loved. You just have to choose not to shrink